Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be concise. Senator Creighton, do you believe that there can be two different paths that lead to the same destination, figuratively and literally?
Absolutely.
And our good friend, Representative James White in the House, is he the House sponsor?
Yes, Representative White and Representative Toth have been working together through the session on this. I believe Representative White has carried the legislation in past sessions, yes.
And your intent, it seems, and I just wanted to clarify, is this bill more about yesterday or more about moving forward and tomorrow?
Definitely moving forward towards the path that we all enjoy and have exhibited on these Capitol grounds, where we reflect on our history, good, bad, and ugly, but we don't destroy it, erase it, or refuse to face it.
I think really I always like to talk to really at the core of any subject. And when we're talking about monuments, there doesn't seem to be a lot of controversy about any monuments we have in Texas about the Spanish-American War. There doesn't seem to be any controversy about the Revolutionary War. It seems to be Civil War monuments. Would you agree with that?
There's controversy with those monuments. There's controversy depending on, as I mentioned, Travis Park in San Antonio, William Barrett Travis being, a defender of the Alamo and in command of the garrison. There's been proposals to remove Sam Houston as a monument that certainly he's not who people think of as a Confederate soldier. There are many different examples, but yes,
so it's expanded beyond that, but the Confederate monuments being at the core of maybe the controversy.
They can be.
I just wanted to share with you, from somebody that grew up in a small town just northeast of Dallas called Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
That's pretty far northeast.
Our Civil War monuments were, of course, Union monuments.
Yes.
And we had one in our plaza growing up, and liked it. And I'd ask my father about what happened and why, and he explained to me what 1861 to 1865 was all about. And to my really shock and horror, over 600,000 Americans, because of course we're fighting on both sides, lost their lives in that conflict. 4 years, the bloodiest 4 years in this country's history. We've lost approximately 1.3 million in all wars combined. So doing the math, almost half of the Americans that have ever fought in a uniform and died were in that 4-year period.
That's right.
So it would seem to me that it would be important to remember what happened and why. And in many ways, these monuments, whether they be Union or Confederate, are gravestones. They're tombstones and who died in those conflicts? Who died? Were they old men or were they young men, 18, 19, 20 years old?
Most were young.
And most were rich or poor?
Over 80% of them were poor.
Poor. And a lot of them were shot through the belly and died not instantly, but an agonizing death, fighting for what they at the time believed in.
Right.
Fighting for their homeland. And I think a lot of people, including myself, feel when they watch something about Gettysburg or anything about the Civil War or see a monument, it's intricately related to the African-American journey here in this country. And the fact that in 1860, there were 4.4 million African-Americans in the country, 3.9 million of which were denied their very liberty, 87%.
That's right.
I want my sons to understand, and there's youthful ignorance in history. There was a study that 2/3 of American millennials surveyed in 2018 couldn't identify what Auschwitz was. What Auschwitz was, a European genocide where 11 million people were murdered, 6 million Jews. In 2014 report, the National Assessment of Education Progress showed that just 18% of American high school students were proficient in U.S. history. It's vitally important that we know where we came from to know where we've gone. I personally believe, and I think probably everyone in this body, in this building today, that the original sin of this country was slavery. The original sin. I want my sons to understand that people at one time were considered property in this country. We weren't the greatest country history has ever known before 1861. We weren't even the greatest history on the planet at that time. But after 1865, And it didn't come, it took a long time. Our racial strife didn't end in 1865. It took 100 years plus to pass a civil rights bill. But that's our history, and we need to know that. And I want my sons to know what the Jim Crow laws were, and separate but equal, and segregation. And I want them to know who James Meredith was. In 1962, not 1862, 1962, an African American in Mississippi who was paying taxes couldn't even attend their own university. My sons are flabbergasted when I tell them this. But it's important because then they understand that the children that they're going to school with have a different perspective, because we learn our perspectives not only from history books, but from our parents and our grandparents and our ancestors. And that's really what we're getting at here. And remembering the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which was made famous by the movie Glory. I think Denzel Washington won an Academy Award for it. But fighting for freedom, 200,000 African Americans serving in the Civil War. And then the Buffalo Soldiers. And then in World War I, the Harlem Hellfighters. And 350,000 African Americans serving in World War I. Over 1 million in World War II. And I remember when we were in the house, the Medal of Honor recipients on the walls. And the one right by the lounge was Clarence Sasser. He was up in Gainesville in Senate District 30, an African American that won the Medal of Honor, an absolute hero, a national treasure. So I think, and I don't want to be presumptuous to what your goal is here, but it could very well be about us remembering where we've come from and remembering some of the awful things that happened so we can make tomorrow better. And not honoring, but simply remembering. Which does that in Poland now. Where we've come from and and think about how far we have journeyed together. And so, thank you for bringing this up, because if we did remove the monuments in the South that depicted the conflict from 1861 to 1865, I don't know if we'd have many left at all. And what happens at Gettysburg? Is it just the Union side? When we learn, do we wipe that history out?
No, it's a balanced depiction.
You need a balanced depiction. And where does it stop? Let's be honest, there's 2 slaveholders on Mount Rushmore. They were men of their time. They were great men that that had one awful, awful mark on their characters. But do we rename Washington, D.C.? I don't know where it ends. Do we rename July and August because they're named after, European totalitarian men? I don't know. And so standing firm and standing, and moving forward, I think these are better tools to teach our children. And is that really where your intentions and where, at the core of your bill, what you'd like to see come out? What's the legislative intent? Is that it?
That's absolutely it, Senator Fallon. I appreciate your remarks and your comments, and we certainly see in the bill itself that we provide a process for that exact balance that you mentioned in Gettysburg. Hopefully communities will take advantage of the provisions in the bill that allow for that, as we've provided a very sensible balance right here on these Capitol grounds, working together so that hundreds of thousands of Texans can benefit from the education from that. And it shows from our intent as we walk these grounds and our intent in this bill that it is inclusive and it provides a predictable framework for all of us to count on in how we handle and balance our recognition of the good and bad in our history and how we need to walk forward together, making sure we don't ever repeat mistakes and that future generations understand that as well, and it's not lost on them.
And some other senators mentioned, other countries, and we're all brothers and sisters on one planet. And I'll end with this. But in Syria, the ancient city of Palmyra, ISIS destroyed a lot of that old ancient Roman city. And in Afghanistan, we saw the Taliban blowing up beautiful 6th century Buddhist statues. They were destroying history. We just want to be very careful about that because it's a dangerous road to go down. Thank you very much for the legislation, and thank you for your answers today.
Appreciate
Mr.
your
President.
remarks, Senator Fallon.